for they hold the memories, culture, tradition and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who contribute to our community. And a very warm welcome to members, guests and visitors, distinguished guests this evening, and a special welcome to Her Worship the Mayor, and if there are any other councillors, welcome to them as well. We were expecting David Thurley to be here. Maybe he's held up a little. We have a number of new members who are here with us tonight. We have David Cotty. David, if you'd like to just put your hand up. David, welcome. We have Harry Flood, who's down the back. Welcome, Harry.
And Elizabeth as well.
And Elizabeth as well. Is here. I didn't see Elizabeth. And also Christine and Lance Painter. Down the back. Welcome, folks. We're also expecting the former Mayor of Griffith, who is going to attend this evening, Mike Neville. He may not have arrived yet. Just a couple of quick things to say. Sad events. We pay tribute to Her Royal Highness Queen Elizabeth II, of course, who passed away this week. And we remember her visit to Albury, or a number of visits actually to Albury. A sad event which has obviously received wall-to-wall coverage on our television sets. And also we remember our late foundation member Frank Higgins, who passed away recently. Frank was a member from that original meeting in 1960, and he paid his dues only for this year, so he's a current member, and sadly passed away. Now, one or two little housekeeping things. Tea and coffee will be provided in this room after the meeting. We're going to aim for a 9 p.m. finish. If we go over and you have commitments, by all means discreetly leave. We understand that. We aim for 9, but there's no guarantee that if people have got something that they want to present, I'd rather let them speak on and present the thing they've prepared. History Week was this week, or last week, from the 3rd to the 11th of September, and our History Week project was a well-attended workshop on Trove, held at the Albury Library Museum in conjunction with the Albury City. Thanks to Bruce Penney and Greg Ryan, who gave us a very informative class on Trove. The other little bit of housekeeping is to say that our most recent publication, Lawmen of Albury by Howard Jones, is on sale with the other society publications down the back. And I see we have just been joined by Mike Neville, the former Mayor of Griffith. So Mike, welcome. And I understand Mike's ready, willing and able to sign an application form. And while Mike's doing it, any other visitors who'd like to join the society, you'd be most welcome. You'll get a very informative bulletin sent digitally each month, prepared by our editor Greg Ryan, and there are lots of interesting information in it. Now, as I said, we've been keenly anticipating the visit from our guest speaker, our historian from Florida. And I also mentioned to members that back in August, our Mayor, Councillor Kylie King, was very generous to give Greg and I an hour of her time to get to know us and the society and what we do. And when we asked and invited Kylie to come along to tonight's meeting to welcome our guest speaker to the town, she readily accepted, and she's here now with us. So, Her Worship the Mayor, Councillor Kylie King.
Thank you, Jeff, for that lovely introduction, and I too wish to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as traditional custodians of the land that we meet upon today, and also pay my respects. So, quite the honour to be invited to your society to give a special welcome to tonight's special guest, We've had a little catch-up, which is great. I was also privy to a wonderful little book that you'll learn a bit more about later on. But yeah, Caesar Becerra, and also reflect on the close ties between the Society and also Albury City Council, and by extension the crucial role that I guess you all have in our community. So it was a way to double up, really welcome a special guest, also I guess reflect on the value that our community and the council sees that the Society provides. And obviously, you know, meeting with the gents and learning more that Cleaver Bunton was involved in the formation. So yeah, a lot of people have made comparisons about him being a ABC newsman back in the day, and the mayor, and so a few people have mentioned, oh, there was another radio person who was quite instrumental in Albury well before your time, my dear. So it's nice to reflect that history sometimes can repeat a little bit. Convened a meeting of people in the town that had an interest in history, so from that humble meeting, here we are today, and I can't believe 60 years, it's wonderful. And I guess I was part of that recent promotion that you did, when you installed plaques on 3 heritage buildings, so it was nice to walk around on a couple of them. It was pretty chilly winter's day, as I recall, actually. But yeah, Adamshurst, Soden's Hotel, and also the Commercial Railway Hotel, which are now those beautiful apartments. And I love that idea to really recognise the owners for prioritising the preservation and the heritage nature of the buildings in their recent restoration works. And I do thank you for that. I've spoken to a few of the owners that have lovingly, especially at Soden's, I spent a lot of time talking to them when they were really keen to just pay tribute in any way they could to the history of the building, and walking around with the owners there at the time, or the lessees, they were talking me through some wonderful stories which made us remember, and it was great. So a wonderful accolade, and really something that our locals as well, but visitors and locals, when they're walking past and they catch a glimpse of the plaque, it's just a nice little reminder, isn't it? So thank you for that. I think that's a wonderful thing. Now, we do know that the Society works very closely and collaboratively with many sections of the council. I know the team at the Library Museum in particular, and also the Town Planning Department, which is obviously important as we grow and develop the city. It's great to have your input, so thank you. We know you've got your monthly meetings, you publish the monthly bulletin. I know that councillors are all privy to a lot of these, so they're always keeping in touch with us about what you're up to, so we do appreciate that. So on behalf of the various Albury City Council committees, councillors, staff, and on behalf of the broader community, thank you for all that you do. Caesar, welcome to Albury. Travelling from Florida for the occasion as an international guest. I'm not quite sure how many international guests you've managed to host, but it's rather special. Number one. Well, that's a wonderful thing, and I can just see that warmth, energy, love and passion. I've only met you for a minute or so, but it really shows through. So thank you so much. You obviously have a great passion for the history that you're about to share with us. And really fascinated to read about the close ties between Albury and, I don't want to reveal all, you probably already know, but I'll leave a lot of it about Mary Bricknell, and it's just amazing to think, a pioneering woman, what she must have done. So I'm really looking forward to that, even though I do have a book on the Mayor's desk for prosperity. So when I find a moment or two to have a good read, probably over the holidays, I'll do that. And I also note that there is a bowl of the famous Florida produce, the oranges, at the front desk there, so it sounds like everyone's done the right thing to make you at home. So thank you on behalf of the council and the city. Thank you so much for presenting to the Society tonight. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Kylie. And I can say usually Mike Neville, who's come all the way from Griffith to be here tonight, would win the prize as the most travelled person present. But unfortunately tonight, Mike, that's going to go to Caesar. He's outdone you by several thousand kilometres. To introduce our guest to you, I call on our immediate past president, our current vice president, Greg Ryan.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Kylie, for that introduction. And it's as you said, it's the first time we've had a visitor from the other side of the world as our guest speaker, and we're all looking forward to it. And many of you will probably be aware that Caesar was out here past that. Caesar was out here 3 years ago doing research, and because I met Caesar at that time, Jeff asked if I'd do the introduction, so I'm happy to do that. And I've tried to, on that little illustration I've got on the screen, just give a bit of a feel of what we're looking at here. We're looking at a fellow in partnership. This is William Brickle in partnership with Adam Kidd, who had a lot of money-making ventures that he was involved in here in Albury. I'm not going to steal too much of your thunder, Caesar, tonight, but I know that they operated the first punt across the Murray River, and we're told that back then the punt was owned by the New South Wales colonial government, and they auctioned off the licence to operate that punt, and Brickle and Kidd bought that licence for £40, and over the next several years they were said to have made £10,000 on that £40 investment. Now I went to the Reserve Bank site to do a calculation of what that is in today's terms, and it equates to something like at least $3 million in today's money. That's on the punt. They also had the Exchange Hotel. Now that's the best photograph I could find of that. It's a very grainy sort of photograph, but it does give a bit of an idea of just how splendid that hotel was, on the corner of Townsend and Smollett, right where the Farmers and Graziers wool stores were, which has now been resurrected as the Quest Apartments, which Caesar stayed in last night on the very site. They had a retail store just to the south of that. They had a coach service between Albury and Melbourne. They had it all wrapped up actually. That was a boom time for Albury. Albury was a frontier town. Gold had been discovered in various places in Victoria. They'd sell the supplies for the mining operations to the diggers heading south. And after they had their pockets full with money that they made, you're probably aware that Ballarat and Bendigo were the richest goldfields in the world. They came back by coach from Melbourne to Albury, and of course stayed in the Exchange Hotel. They also built the first Union Bridge. They were paid £7,000 for that. That equates to about $2 million in today's terms. And in 1900, you're probably aware, and I've been stressing to Caesar, that he married an Albury girl. He was talking about a girl from England. No, she's an Albury girl. He married an Albury girl, and her mum was still here in Albury for some time, and a brother who ran the business, which eventually was bought by Frew and Logan. Now, many people would be aware of the Logan's timber yard, and I think Doug, that might have been where you did your apprenticeship. Am I right? Where's Doug?
No, I didn't.
Well, you certainly worked there, didn't you? Well, they bought that from Joseph Bulmer, who was William Brickle's brother-in-law, the brother of Mary. So they, Brickle and Mary, William Brickle and his wife Mary, came back to Albury in 1900. They were disappointed, it was said, with the progress of Albury, but we understand why, because they took bucket loads of money away from Albury. There should have been money in Albury, and it was spent over, developing Miami and other places in Florida. So he had no right to complain. I had a little Brickle moment a couple of weeks ago. I had been approached by Destination New South Wales to do a voiceover for what they described as a short YouTube video clip, 30-second video clip. So I said, that doesn't sound too bad. I can manage that. So I turned up thinking it was going to take me something like 20 minutes to 30 minutes. They said, look, we'd like to do a few photos as well. So, okay, maybe a few more minutes. We did the photo shoot in the gardens, and they said, we'll meet you back at the Quest Hotel on Townsend. I made the mistake of saying, there's a good story about the Quest Hotel on Townsend Street. That's the one where William Brickle made a lot of money and went and founded the city of Miami. Oh, we'd like to hear that story, they said. But I've only got 30 seconds. Oh, you'll be able to do it, so we'll meet you back at the hotel in about 20 minutes. Well, an hour later they turned up, By then I'd been going through in my head, how am I going to get that bit across? So they sat me up in a room there. They said, we've got to go to a room where it's nice and quiet. And in that room I had the producer over this side. I had the lady from Destination New South Wales over here. I had a director in front of me. And right in front of me I had a sound man. So I thought I was pretty cool until then, but I started to get a little bit uncool. And they'd asked me a few questions, and we got to Brickell. And they said, now can you tell us a little bit about this place and what William Brickell did over in Miami? So I had rehearsed something I might be able to say. And I said that Brickell and Kidd arrived in Albury in the early 1850s. Hang on, Greg, hang on. You can't say Albury. You must say Albury Wodonga. But they didn't go to Wodonga. No, you must say Albury Wodonga. Okay. So they'd been commissioned to make sure it was always Albury Wodonga. So I started again. I got about maybe 8 seconds into it. Hang on, Greg, too many words. And I was very uncool. Now, Caesar in his book, I'll quote from his book. This is on page 128 if you finish up with the book. He met me in the library 3 years ago. Greg Ryan is one of the calmest and most collected local historians I've ever known to exist. You would have rewritten it, I think, Caesar, if you had been there that day. However, we got there. And he goes on then a little bit further down to talk about meeting Joe Wooding. Now, I know a lot of people here know and love Joe for what he contributed towards recording and researching and recording Albury history. And he talked about the fact that he got to the point where he was talking about, he was talking to me, and I was amazed at his excited jabbering and about how much information that he'd found. And in his final sentence in this paragraph, when I finally paused to take a breath, Greg Ryan took his opportunity to gently inform me, Caesar, we haven't even begun yet. Now that was because Joe hadn't arrived. Joe arrived with a very, very large format picture. I'm not sure why that's going off on me tonight, but a very large format picture of the first Union Bridge that they built on the over the Murray River, and folders full of information about Brickell and Kidd and what they had achieved here in Albury. So Joe was the one that really did get, well, obviously he was pretty enthused about the story anyway, but more than enthused once Joe spent, was it 3 days with you? Showing him just about every place where William Brickell and Mary Bulmer took a step in Albury and beyond, out to Yakandanda, which is where they first had a look for some gold. So I've also got just a brief description of who Caesar is. Caesar Becerra is a South Florida historian who's taken part in chronicling and sharing the stories of the region for 2 decades. He looks such a young bloke, doesn't he? He turned 50 3 days ago. He is the author of half a dozen books ranging from hiking the Appalachian Trail to the logging history of the Big Cypress Preserve. He is the former publisher of the Everglade magazine, an award-winning publication printed during Everglades National Park's 50th anniversary. He has walked, hiked, slogged, canoed, kayaked, airboated, and swamp buggied all across the Everglades. In 1997, the Miami Herald named him an Everglades evangelist. He also has a penchant for hidden history and knows no boundaries or distances when it comes to searching for it. So please welcome Caesar so he can tell you a bit more about this story.
It's indeed an honor to be here, everybody. This town is quite special to me. Now it's become so well trodden that I've been answering questions even ahead of Greg telling me.
He could run the tours.
Yeah. So this project and this book that I wrote is called Orange Blossom 2.0. And these beautiful oranges here are at the origin story of quite the myth and the mythology of how Miami was born. Quite simple. You can go home tonight, you can right from your seat, just tap into your phones, and you'll find the story more than likely about one woman named Julia Tuttle, who was a Cleveland widow who sent Henry Flagler, a mega tycoon, a partner of John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil, a bouquet of orange blossoms after 2 devastating freezes back to back with 1 month in 1894 and 1895. And miraculously, Henry Flagler moved heaven and earth and brought his railroad to Miami, 77 miles from West Palm Beach. I'm here to tell you that that story is highly, highly simplified, so much so that it's kind of embarrassment. In a court of law, we were talking about a court of law today, it would not stand up very well. In the last 25 years that I've been covering this story, not 24 hours a day, but 25 years ago I did the first exhibit on Mary Brickell. And by the way, 25 years ago I did not know the Albury connection. So this is how far we've come. Just 10 years ago, we got the notion that Mary Brickell was indeed the landowner, not her husband. But on paper, it was her land. But we'll go into the reason I chose Orange Blossom 2.0. Well, the retelling of the story is far more complex, far cooler, more interesting, and also brings in Mary Brickell, the other mother of Miami, and some would say, some even went further than I did on the back of the book, and some would say that she is the true mother of Miami, but I'm cool right now with co-mother status. But I wanted to tell the story, and before I tell that story, like you all here recognize your natives, important to the story of Mary Brickell are the natives of South Florida, the Seminole Indians, which we have also come a long way from these black and white photos. And I'm not a massive lover of colorizing old photos, but I do have to agree, we have learned even more about the Seminoles, and it was their lands before, Mary Brickell and William got there, so we want to honor that. But they also play an important part of the story of understanding why Mary Brickell not only has been marginalized, or should be a mother, but how motherly she was. So there's a difference between mothering a city and how motherly you are to a people, a city, how conscious you are. And we chose a design of the book that's very much, looks a little odd, not your typical history book. It comes out the gate as a legal document, if you will, redacted as it's so, and I'll get to the nuts and bolts. I came out very kind of controversial with saying Julia Tuttle's the only mother of Miami, because this is what you find. And the next paragraph undergrad, I said, well, not exactly. And my book is about reimagining the birth of the city of Miami with Mary Brickell. And I make my case through some 270 pages, and we can go on. This is all that we know that right now. But we got the idea from, or designing the cover, because of the Mueller investigation against our former president. This was going to be a very dry report from the government documents. It didn't even have a fancy cover. And the New Yorker magazine reached out to 5 internationally known artists and say, how can you make this report more interesting, and more sexy? I mean, people want to really open it. And one guy did a cat, who's opposed to a cute kitten? Another, like kind of the controversy of, is this an inside job, etc. But one artist, a Japanese female artist from New York, one of the top design artists in the nation, did this very simple title of the report, and through the unredacted portions is the title of the book. And I loved how simple, and it just gravitated, and I went with it. Sometimes you have to go with it, and I got a lot of flack for this cover. A lot of people are like, why don't you put Mary on the cover? Well, it's not necessarily about Mary, it's about how we have dealt with Mary's story. And so, unbeknownst to me, and kind of helping me out after taking this bold step of this kind of odd-looking cover here with not much pizzazz, Time magazine comes out 2 weeks before this book comes out with a cover that's designed pretty much, let's face it, I didn't know they had it, they didn't know I had it, we didn't cahoots with this. And the topic is the history wars, and the subtopic is the politics of teaching America's past. And the story of Mary Brickell is politically entwined, a little dirty, a little jealousy, lots of money, landowning, a female that's not from the United States, an Albury girl. You know, and you will find throughout my book the reasons why Mary was, you know, not. But it was fascinating that, you know, I was onto something. And one of the many reasons that we, or the community of Miami, has never chosen Mary Brickell, one of the big ones, one of the ones that isn't really an important reason, but it was firm, is that there was never known to be a photo of Mary Brickell for many, many years. In fact, the first photo surfaced in 1995. And many historians said over and over again, well, Mary was too ugly. Mary was too cantankerous. Mary was too shy. Mary was all these accolades, and I listed them in my book. But it's not the case. Once we found the first photo, we quickly found 3 more. Now we have 4 photographs, and you will, you know, soon there know that Mary is not ugly. She doesn't look like a cantankerous bone in her body. She's very gentle and kind, you know, all these truths that we thought when you go to recognize somebody, you don't have a photo, it works against them. Okay, so I did not choose to put any photos in the book. I put 1 drawing of Mary Brickell. I didn't want to rely on the old adage that, well, just because you have a photo, you are what you are. So we were very careful by just presenting the facts. Now, the first photo of Mary Brickell did surface 1 year before the centennial. And it was a very tough pill to swallow for many people, because for many years, Mary Brickell was just not talked about. And for many years, every time the Brickels were talked about as a family, well, you can imagine, William got all the credit. So all those years that we thought, well, wait, we're not even mentioning the union of these 2 individuals. But here is the first photo. It simply said on the back, "Mother and myself." And it was in a box that shouldn't have been in a box, and it was in a city that came from Ocala to a librarian in Opelika to this, you know, just languished there for almost 15 years, until a very astute historian, activist, and 4'10" Carmen Petsula spent 30 years of her life to prove that there was a photo of Mary Brickell. This lady here, who would not be standing today, were it not on the backs of many different ladies. Actually, we're going to get to more ladies later. It's interesting that ladies have played a very part to build Mary back up. But she found that photo, and she found it because she lived across the street from this little lady, is named Roosevelt Peacock, one of the founding families of Miami were the Peacocks. And it was Peacock that told Carmen Petsulas, who lived in the neighborhood just by chance across from Roosevelt, who designed this neighborhood? It's beautifully designed. Who did the roundabouts? Why is there a wide avenue road in front of my house? Why is there an alleyway to make things easier? Why is this so different from the rest of Miami? She said, well, that's easy. Mary Brickell designed this neighborhood that you're sitting in. And she said, who was Mary Brickell? Well, she was, you know, the unsung mother of Miami. What do you mean the unsung? Well, she hasn't been given credit. Well, was there a photograph? No, there's no photograph. And Carmen vived from that day, and she has worked very hard to find all the photos of Mary Brickell. This is a beautiful photo of Mary, one of my favorites, and the one we chose in our book. So we're going to explore Mary's journey here. Mary's journey, you know, gets kind of catapulted, of course, when she meets William Brickell here in Albury. We say approximately 1856, 1857 for sure, because they do have a child that by 1862 is 5 years old. So we do know that they met here in Albury. But she gets her start in England, even though now we're calling her the Albury girl. But anyway, she meets start in England, arrives in Sydney in 1840 as a 3-year-old child with a family whose the patriarch is known for his high-end carpentry. Eventually they moved to Goulburn, and then from Goulburn over to Albury, where they establish a good living in this city, eventually getting into the lumber industry. It's in Goulburn where she picks up kind of her avocation, which was sewing and you know, seamstress work, basically. Later on in her life, she still actually put on 2 different censuses, even though she had more land and money that you can hold on to. She's still a seamstress when it came down to it, even though she's the real estate magnate. Here in Albury, they Brickell with Adam Kasner Kidd, also from Ohio. Mr. Brickell was from Steubenville, Ohio, ironically the subject of another book that I wrote of a guy named Steubenville. I wouldn't figure that out until years later. But here they are on the corner of Townsend and Smollett Street, both sides of Smollett Street. You can see here A.C. Kidd and W.B. Brickell. And Brickell does, as you heard today, and I'm glad you covered that, because my story is about why Mary was ignored, but basically made most of his money here around the gold rush. He had been in California during the main gold rush, made some money, good money, but not crazy money. If he had made crazy money, he probably would not have taken the risk, because it was dangerous to go anywhere in those days across the seas. We'll get into that a little bit later, but made his money around surrounding the gold. The hotel that he owned is the Exchange Hotel with Mr. Kidd. Very much one of the top places to stay. I mean, the niceties on the advertisements go on and on about high end this, high end that, and all sorts. This is one of only 2 photographs. The second photograph that exists is just a corner of the building, very even hazier than this. So there are 2 known photographs. And of course, the bridge. I'm going to pause here and tell you that the bridge becomes a very big deal later in our story as to why the Brickells have been ignored. Later on, when they get to the United States and they start building Miami, they contractually try to make Henry Flagler build his bridge across the river to Brickell Land before the railroad gets here. Mr. Brickell knew very well that if that railroad did not have that bridge over the river, their lands would be marginalized. That's exactly what happened. The feud instated one of, again, the 20 reasons why the Brickels have always been pushed aside. You have to know that the father of Miami had beef with the Brickels, and that goes way back. This bridge was a moment for me. I was doing research in the library, actually just on my computer on Trove, just magically, mesmerized by Trove. And out comes this photo that I've been hearing all about, and Joe Woody put in front of my face. And I remember him kind of laughing at me because I was kind of hyperventilating. He said, well, relax, I have a 6-foot version at my house. This is nothing. So sure enough, he took me to his house, and there's a massive... I got to meet the family, not only in their gravesite, but actually met Michael Bulmer in Sydney just after this shot was taken. So I've met the family, and luckily I met the one guy who really cares about the Bulmer history a lot. So I'm still wanting to get more information. But after Albury, they did go to Melbourne, and the day before they left to the United States, they got married at this church, the Scots Church, only it wasn't inside the Scots Church. The Scots Church did not exist. On their marriage certificate, it says the manse, and the manse is basically this photo that I'm holding inside in front of the church, and this is the only known photograph of the manse where William married Mary and Mary married William. And it's significant. There's a lot of drawings about the manse, but there's no known photos except for this one. So it was a moment for me. I got to actually walk into the building that was built over this one called the Assembly Hall today at Scots Church, behind the main church. Just by luck, the section where the folks there told me the ceremony would have taken place is now a bookstore with this plush red carpeting, red marriage, and a quiet, solemn place. So, and it was a moment when I walked into that room that for some odd reason, this happens to me many times, the people at the desk kind of scurried about to go get something, and I was left alone at that moment, that very moment that I would be on what I would call, pretty interesting ground of the Brickels. I'm the type that have to, and I even kind of juncture and say, is this Mary peeking out? Now, this is a photo of downtown Miami in 1888. 1888, not much there. Sailboat, little palm trees. There's not even a 2-story building at this point in time. Very lonely, kind of, desolate. Florida was called the final frontier. We had already crossed America with the Transcontinental Railroad. We had explored every part of every other state. But there were parts of South Florida that, minus the Seminole Indians, white men had not stepped inside, okay? This is at a time where, nobody was down there. Very few people were down there. And here is where William Brickell approaches a lady in South Carolina named Harriet English and has to spend 4 years of his life untangling all her land deeds, because there was a lot of things that came in contact with the Spanish land grant. You had to be careful. If you didn't buy the right land with the right clearance, it would come back to you in court, and that land would be taken right away. So Brickell took a big risk, but when the dust settled, 2,400 acres of land was purchased. Now the key thing here is this next part, and we wouldn't know this till 10 years ago. the land was placed in Mary Brickell's name. It's Williams by marriage, but it is Mary Brickell's land. Very significant. This is at a time in history where women couldn't vote. Some states you had a very hard time even inheriting the land, having that much land. So this was a radical amount of land. But more importantly, this was only 1874. By 1896, when the railroad got there, Mary Brickell would be in command of 6,400 acres of land. And I pose you this question. What was Mary Brickell doing with 6,400 acres of land where nobody was around? Now, a lot of people have tried to brush her off, but you can't brush off this piece of reality. She is not building a squash court in her backyard. That's way too much land. At that point of history, that's insane. She was there, and he was there to build a city. Okay, and that city was Miami. And we get the story, one of the greatest stories was with Henry Flagler's right-hand man. Mary Brickell in 1913, I know I'm jumping around, but this is important to know how powerful Mary Brickell was. In 1913, she was taken to court by the city of Fort Lauderdale. She owned land in Fort Lauderdale. And initially she gave it to the people of Fort Lauderdale, not the city. Now that's no here or there, but she took it to court, was offended that the city wanted to take over the land. She lost in Supreme Court. She fought it to the Supreme Court. But in the Supreme Court, they asked Henry Flagler's second in command, they said, tell us about the early days in Miami and dealing with Mr. Brickell. And almost at the point in the transcript, it stopped. And Mr. Ingram excuses him, says, excuse me, I dealt with Mary Brickell. Now this is huge. We're talking about a gentleman who, Rockefeller himself said he was the brains behind Standard Oil. So we're talking about one woman, an Albury girl. We're on number 3 now. You like that? All right. Dealing with a titan in the business world. And it's important because Flagler cannot get to Miami without going through Mary Brickell's land, 2,000 of which are in Fort Lauderdale, 2,000 in Miami, and a sneaky 125 acres in West Palm Beach, pinning Mr. Henry Flagler, the titan of the Standard Oil world, from moving until he dealt with Mary Brickell. I don't know if I mentioned she's from Albury. I'm having a good time teasing Greg here. All right, so now what you see in the background is the Brickell trading post when they got to Miami, and all this land was under their command. They didn't really have to hemorrhage a lot of work and they had a lot of money. In fact, they thought for 5 years what to do with the money, and they could have retired nicely. But they went ahead and did something bold, just as bold as when Brickell came to Australia or Mary's family came to Australia. They decided for the second major time in life to go out and found a city. That's hard work. For 20 years, they were like the lone Mohican here in Miami. And that's their home later on in life. That's their home when Henry Flagler came to town to clear land to build this very fancy hotel. And to show you a little adage about history and that you really can't hide everything forever. And this book is all about the things we have found all these years. You see the gentleman behind, the white gentleman in the back? The laborers, the black African-American and Bahamian American laborers? For many years, this photo always had the caption of every white gentleman in a suit there. Never the back row. We have found out to the T who every one of those workers are. And now there's a project to find out who exactly they were. So in other words, you can't really hide it all. Now I say this on another reason. One of the genuine top reasons Mary Brickell was marginalized is she was kind and generous and very helpful to the African American and Bahamian American communities, and she paid the price for it. You have to understand that Miami was a southern, underlying, italicized. This was not a thing looked upon greatly, but Mary Brickell got a big pass. Why? She was a big landowner, folks. She was not some little totem pole on the, she was Mary Brickell. And if she wanted to do something, she had the power to do it. And upon her death, there was a long line, almost like a block and a half, reaching outside the Brickell mansion with African American mourners. The flower shops were gutted. They said this had never happened with Julia Tuttle or William Brickell or Henry Flagler. This was a moment. When she died, it was a moment, particularly for this community. They always felt they had, everything stacked against them. The irony of which, by the way, when Miami was formed, They needed 400 votes so they could bypass township and become a city. Well, they relied on 200 black workers who couldn't vote, but they could sign a document and get the city started. So it's the ultimate irony there. This is Florida in 1893. If you look very closely, everything pretty much stops around Cape Canaveral. Nothing, and I mean nothing on the East Coast, anywhere near West Palm or even Miami. In Miami, you don't see a stitch of a road there. And there was no way to get to Miami. This is how foresight that the Brickles were. They picked a location that you couldn't even get to in a massive ship. You had to bypass Miami, go to Key West, get on a small little tiny ship and come back, weather permitting, 2-3 days added to your trip, because there was no deep water port. That would come later. But they gambled on the fact that Henry Flagler not only was coming down the state, but would go way down and pass Miami. We'll get to that in a second. The catalyst to the moment that we always talk about, the orange blossom and the fabled story of Julia Tuttle, happens with, this is a great, best photo to illustrate 1894, 1895, a freeze hits, the story goes, she sends the blossoms. But one of the things I did was to pose some questions that are a little uncomfortable, especially to the historical community and historians and people who like to hang tight to the story that's just not true. And by the way, the story was debunked in 1920, November 20th, by James Ingram, Henry Flagler's right-hand man, told the full story of how it happened. It was he that got the orange blossom. But anyway, we don't want to divert now, but look back at this photo. The moment this happens, all of a sudden, years that Flagler spent saying no, he's now moving heaven and earth to get to Miami. You have to pause and look at the fact that economically, it was the time to go. Land prices tanked. Everybody was out of a job. When the first freeze hit in December 17, the state was pretty hit hard, but things can rebound. But when one hit again 1 month later, it was the death knell for Florida, and everything was dying, including Henry Flagler's mode of money to ship vegetables out of the state and bring tourists to his fancy hotels. So it was not only just these flowers and the whole thing about the flowers and the blossoms, but this was the time economically for Flagler to move, and he did so. So that hasn't been really discussed as a viable source. Now, Julia Tuttle gets most of the fame of Miami. You can rack yourself, bash your head against the internet. You'll not find Mary in a lot of cases. She's starting to finally eke through, but you'll find the Julia Tuttle. Let's observe very quickly why. Julia was a widow from Cleveland. Widows are kind of put in that category of underdog, and I'm not removing Julia Tuttle as a mother. She is a co-mother in Miami, in my opinion. She played a very integral role, but you cannot ignore what Mary did. But another thing is she was friendly, with Flagler. She knew Flagler from Cleveland, lived 3 blocks from him, went to church with Flagler. Flagler's friend Johnny Rockefeller knew Julia Tuttle. She was socially connected. She would win the social media award in that time. Case in point, she could just open up her window and yell out a press release because the Miami metropolis was right across her street. So she didn't need to do much to get her story out. And let us remember that when Flagler didn't build the bridge across the river in time, peripherally speaking, if you're in Miami in 1896, well, all you see is Julia Tuttle's land moving heaven and earth and dirt flying. You don't see anything happen to the Brickles. So peripherally, Miami looked like it was on the north end of the bank of the Miami River, where the Tuttle's land are. Here's Henry Flagler. We now know that Flagler actually once said that he never thought Miami would really make it. He actually initially thought Miami was no more than a glorified fishing village. He would eat those words later when he started watching very closely, then almost finished the Panama Canal was chugging its way along. And he saw an opportunity. To get to that opportunity, he had to beat out 2 ports in Florida. So those ships came out of the Panama Canal and would go to those 2 ports. They were in Jacksonville and Tampa, but if he could build a port somewhere in the south tip of Florida, he would corner this market. And so with that knowledge, and now we know he already had that thought before he moves to Miami, all lands south of any river in Fort Lauderdale, in Miami, are far more important as a leverage point to going south than anything on the north bank. He needed the Brickles. Even if he stopped at Miami, never built the bridge, he still needed the bridge if he was going to go to Key West eventually. So we know that now, and that's an important part of this kind of dance. I call it the elaborate chess match. For many years, this has been published widely as Miami's birth certificate. It is now finally started to be questioned because this is simply a document that tells Flagler he's going to build his hotel on a certain piece of Julia Tuttle's land. The document that really brings it forward, I'll come back to these shots here, is this document. This is the birth certificate of Miami. This is the only certificate that has all parties signing. It's the only certificate that actually delineates the land, borders, just like you have one for Albury, or here's the one for Miami. And you'll notice there's just as much land on the South Bank as there is on the North Bank. North Bank Tuttle property, South Bank Brickell property. However, there's some interspersed Brickell lands on the North Bank. Later on, an author named Beth Brickell, not Beth Brickell, no relation to the Brickels, but did a study of the actual pieces of land that were donated to Flagler, every other lot type thing. An immense amount of land given away to lure this gentleman down there. But they also knew what they're doing. But just in case you really want to know who signed the document, well, there's Mary Brickell on line 1. What do we do with Mary? Yeah, she is in every turn you go in the city of Miami's birth, yet she is wholly, continually ignored. In part for this great story, in part for who she was, in part because she had a lot of land. There's things we're trying to change. But there's William Brickell on the second line, Julia Tuttle, and then James Ingram signing for Henry Flagler. We'll go back here a second. One of my favorite stories is November 20th, 1920. James Ingram goes to the Miami Women's Club and tells the story of how the birth of Miami happened, and it's wholly different. Yes, there's blossoms, but not only orange, but tree clippings of every kind. There's a box, 4x4x4 square with wet towels. There's clippings that he himself said he clipped of all sorts of tropical trees. But even if we go ahead and just chuck the box away, he then says, and I also brought with me contracts from Mrs. Brickell and Mr. Brickell and Mrs. Julia D. Tuttle. Now, the blossoms are sweet and cute, but it's not worth a hill of beans without the contracts. That comma is very important. Without that, it just wouldn't have happened. We also have some conflicting terms with the orange blossom story. In 1913, a document that came out of Coconut Grove says that actually it was a spray of lime blossoms that were cut, and they were cut in Coconut Grove at Kirk Monroe's house, which was a tradition to cut orange blossom and lime sprigs from Kirk Monroe's house. And they did visit Coconut Grove as well on that trip. And by the way, Flagler is not going to move heaven and earth because bouquets arrive. What if those bouquets were in a greenhouse? What if they were inside before the storm? He is not going to move thousands and thousands of men and dollars, etc., because something green showed. In fact, he actually asked Mr. Ingram, "Is this true, gentlemen?" And Mr. Ingram says, "Yes, we picked them ourselves." So again, one story begets this kind of simplified version. But when you go back to the early newspapers of Miami, now we're having a field day, just like you have a field day with Trove. We're having a field day finding that the earliest stories of Miami, always mentioning Mary and Julia, almost in the same sentence. Two of them have it in the title. You don't have to dig very deeply. Both women were integral for starting the city. Now, why did that change in the 1920s? By the 1920s, we're hopping, we're rolling, everything's quickly. We need a quicker story. Flagler's men are in charge of that growth. Flagler still has a beef with the Brickels. Even in court, things were getting hot. The lawyers are saying, and I quote, "The Brickels are getting sore. We better change this." So there's a lot of problems with the Flagler interest and the Brickell interest. And then I want to throw in an extra one. Mary Brickell's husband, William, had a fallout with Julia Tuttle's father, and he took him to court. So you're starting to see a pattern now. The Hatfrees and McCoy, what do they say in the United States? That side of a feud type thing. And then in 1958, finally, people start to kind of look at the process and correct the story once again. So we have Mary and Julia, then just Julia, and now in 1958, a very important document came out by a lady named Jane Wood Reno. You've seen some pattern, important women, very astute writer. Her daughter becomes, later in history, the first female Attorney General of the United States of America, Janet Reno. This is not just some, person writing an op-ed piece. what Jane Wood Reno was looking at when she wrote this article in 1958, because there were no computers, no internet, no way to go back, are the clippings files. And you probably know or don't know, in the old days, we used to cut up the whole newspaper and put them in little envelopes by subject. Well, all that Jane was doing is reading play-by-play of the early days of Miami, and she was seeing that, well, hey, Mary Brickell was actually here way before, 20 years before Julia. What do we do with that? Women you'll remember? Mary Brickell, mother of Miami, she calls Julia here, comma, the other mother of Miami. I think this document is so important I travel with it every day. No, I'm kidding. This is for an exhibit we did long ago. But we have Mary Brickell herself talking to the city of Miami in an open letter a month before she dies, telling of the story of the birth of Miami. In fact, telling of her own mini beef with Flagler. She said, for years I tried to impress upon Mr. Flagler for widening the narrow streets of Miami, etc., etc. She was criticizing the way Miami was booming. And one of the key things that also led a very noted historian named Joe Konech to write an article called Not Everybody Liked the Brickels was because the Brickels were slow to develop their land. But they also didn't want to develop too quickly because they saw what was happening in the north bank of the river. And today, guess what? The most sought-after pieces of land in Miami are on Brickell Avenue because you have a 100-wide stretch, you have the roundabouts, you have the alleyways I've told you about, you have the greenery, you have the saving of some parts of the forest throughout the years that are still there. So you have this careful, but people thought they were holding back progress. So this hurt them. And when the gavel hit on the opening day, we became a city in 1896 on July 28th, and mayor said, what's our first order of business? Someone raised their hand. And do you know the first order of business of the city of Miami was? We've got to move that post office from the Brickell store over to the North Bank. So already off the bat, you see this disdain for the power the Brickels had, the first store, the first bank, because nobody else had a safe. The post office is on the south side of the river. You had to go row across to get your mail. They wielded a lot of power, even though Flagler was, not treating them correctly. And here's this beautiful mansion that they built. This is the Brickell Mansion that was there till 1961. And this is lowly little Miami as it's starting to grow. And I'm going to read you from a small part of the book, and then we'll take some questions. But this is another interesting part. There's always a money thing. Let's face it. There's always interest, interest of money, and the Brickels had a lot of it. And there was a lot of rumors of how much money the Brickels made and how much they kept, how much they put in the bank, etc. We have a new document that just came out about, what happened to all the millions of dollars that the Brickels had. And this is from a chapter called, where is it? Bronze ATM. So chapter 17, page 157. This is a chapter that was made possible because of a letter that just surfaced no later than 2 years ago. So one thing about the book is I say over and over again, there's still going to be much more about the Brickels. Greg and I were talking about how much more we're going to learn from Chasing the Kids side. And by the way, I'm not the first. This book is also because of a lot of people that came before me that did a lot of research. Chris Wilde in the back, thank you for coming. Chris and Denise McMahon, two genealogists from Australia, did a heap of work before I ever got to the scene, before ever other authors did. So we're just kind of looking at the crumb trail and finding out even more. So this letter was actually a letter that was found in the Brickell papers, kind of lost over the years, and given to me by Beatrice Brickell, who wants to come to your city, by the way. She will be here in the future. She says she's not coming out without me, so I guess I'm coming back. But Bea gave me this letter, and it was a letter that was written by Charles Brickell's widow. Upon interviewing him before he died, she claimed that Charles was a little weirded out by how the Brickels, particularly Mary, was interred in the ground. And here is a sliver of that, and then we'll open it up to questions. If you ask me, the money is in the casket. If it's not in the casket, well, it was once in the casket. Fanny knew it, Fanny Brickell. So does Mrs. B. Not that Miss B, no, the other, no, actually, by now all the Mrs. B's know. Let me slow down, I'm getting ahead of myself. It is my educated guess, ladies and gentlemen, that inside a rather expensive bronze casket, not bronze plated, not bronze stained, a solid bronze casket, there's a large sum of money. There, that's better. I want to be accurate. After all, we were talking about $1 or $2 missing million. The casket may not be bronze anymore. It was switched for some reason when the body was moved from the ground to the mausoleum. That's true. There also may not be any money anymore, or not as much. And the casket was yet switched again when the body was moved from the mausoleum to the city cemetery of Woodlawn, alongside the venerable Tamiami Trail. And if the money isn't there, well, then Mrs. B. Brickle, thinks there's all slight of possibility with some of that forensic fanciness you sometimes see, ironically, on CSI Miami, perhaps some sort of residue. It is, at the very least, can show that the money was once there to begin with. When Mary Brickle died in 1922, she did so quietly, the passing, that is. If you ask me, she was buried twice that day, once in the ground and once 6 pages in. The mother of Miami, who wielded so much land, was not even covered in front page news. A very sliver on the front and buried in the 6th page. William Brickle got front page, Julia Tuttle got front page, Henry Flagler got front page all over the nation, but not Mary Brickle. And once 6 pages in one of the newspapers. But if you wanted to count each time she was buried, that would have to be 4 times. 3 times in the final resting place and the affirmation burial in the newspaper. Folks, in 1961, when the Brickle mansion that you saw earlier was torn down, the last people to walk inside of it noticed that there were potholes all throughout the house. Everybody was looking for the money. And Charles, before he died, told his wife, I want you to take this down. And they had it notarized, by the way. This was the handwritten, but I saw the notarized one later. Because he felt that there was some funny things happening with his last sister, Maud Brickle. And he stated in this document that when Mary Brickle died, Maud stayed alone in the room with the corpse for 24 hours, locked. Now, I'm not saying she wasn't sad, right? You know, so Mom, 24 hours, locked door, what's going on? He also noted that when the body was moved from the ground to the mausoleum, the casket was switched, and there was a mausoleum. She built the mausoleum when the 4 brothers were out of town. Imagine that. And it was just too coincidental that she moved it again in 1961 upon a great quote in the Miami Herald says, "The city's getting too noisy even for the dead." Charles Brickle wanted the world to know that it was his theory that that money could have been in there. No need to change the bronze casket to wooden. That's a solid bronze casket. 2-3 years, I assure you, nothing's going to happen to the bronze casket, full bronze, in the ground. So a lot of fishy things happen with the Brickles. There's still a long way to go to get to all the truths of the Brickles. Mr. William Brickle was a kind of a wild storyteller. And so you're looking at a project that will go on, probably with other people. I'm going to kind of sit back as a hobby now. But there's a lot of things that we still will know. But I think we have enough information to show that Mary Brickle was a remarkable lady from Albury that went on to found an incredible city that we know of as Miami. Thank you very much. I'll take any questions you guys will have right now. Any questions are good, even from Greg here, to get us started.
I'll start my questions.
Right here.
Yes, you were saying about the blossoms in the book blossoms.
Yeah.
And were they big orchards? Were they growing fruit, or was it?
Yeah, there were a lot of orchards in Miami. You can grow almost everything in Miami without not even trying. But there were orange groves, avocado groves, mango groves, all sorts of groves, lime groves, all over. And to her credit, Julia Tuttle did have groves on her property, but there were a lot of people that had orange groves on their property. You know, the other problem with the orange blossom story is you could not just FedEx orange blossoms to St. Augustine of Henry Flagler. It was such an arduous task, made even harder after the freeze. Everything was locked up, everything, nobody's doing much, you know. So, you know, for that to happen, it would have taken a miracle for them to actually arrive in any good condition. Plus, we have a statement in 1920, not only at the speech, but printed in the Miami Herald of what James Ingram said. You know, that it was he and his folks, and Flagler sent them down to get a report from the unbelievable report that Miami had been spared by the frost. Okay, but again, I tell you this, you know, would a magnet like that just simply move heaven on earth because a ream of flowers showed up? Not necessarily. And when you see the contract that he starts writing later between him and Julia and him and the Brickles, oh man, he is fastidious about all the things he needs and wants, and you know, it wasn't as easy as that. In fact, Julia Tuttle's contract is ridiculous, down to the pipe he needs running across her property to his hotel. I mean, that specific. You know, he did not, his lawyers did not leave anything out. So the story is taking on a lot of water, has been over the years. They've had a lot of confusion of it, but it's stuck. It's a great story. I admit it. It's a fabulous, you know. So that's. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh yes.
So their name, Brickle, was obviously donated to Brickle Avenue that's in
Yes.
Miami.
Yes.
Is there anything else? Is there a Brickle building or
Great.
statues or anything like that?
The only Brickle thing left really standing is that mausoleum, but it is standing in a 2.29 acre park that's worth an estimated $40 million. And as a park that was donated to the city of Miami, but here's the big but. This is why the Brickles are still, you know, prevalent right now and still part of the game. With a reverter clause that said if the city of Miami ever makes this or tries to commercialize it in any way, the Brickles have a right to take back that land. And they have sued twice. The city of Miami does some pretty interesting hanky-panky now and then, once with a developer, once trying to give a 20-foot easement to a hotel. They were sued. And the suit said, look, you push it any further, this land is ours. Here's the reverter clause. And it's pretty clear. So the Brickles still have skin in the game, so to speak. But most of them have moved out of Miami, sold most of their property out of Miami. But this one little park is pretty interesting. It's called Brickle Park. Later renamed Mary Brickle Park, because Mary Brickle actually gave it to the city, you know. But good question. Good question. Yes, right over here.
This is just a comment about another Albury person who went to Florida and owned a lot of land.
Oh,
His name is Keneally.
Keneally.
And in my research of dentists here in Albury, through my friend Tony Wilson, he went to school with the son of this dentist.
Oh.
And he made a lot of money post-war, during the war, on the transport across Albury through the eastern states to the west of Perthway. And he went over to Florida, and apparently, according to Tony, he had a big boat like our Gulf of the Shark, and he owned a lot of land and developed it with the sort of Florida Key type things, and his name was Keneally.
Keneally,
What his
okay.
first name was. So that,
It doesn't ring a bell, but there's a lot of pioneers that, you know, are in the city cemetery and in the rolls. There's still a pioneer society in Miami, Natives a Day Pioneers Club. So we can look that up. There is a third Albury connection to Miami, and we just kind of stumbled upon it today. The KLM plane that landed here years ago, the airline that owned the original airplane before they were sold to KLM and the military in Australia, were actually an Eastern Airlines Miami airline, headquarters in Miami, that would fly from New York to Miami, New York to Miami. So even today, to the plane that's there right now, that was an Eastern Airlines owned plane from Miami. So we have 3 and counting. Yes.
Did Joe Wooding ever show you a remnant of the Exchange Hotel, which is still here in Albury, the stables that belong to?
Yes. Wonderful. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that today. Today we actually took a photo there, the border post, and this is the last known actual piece that the Brickles really did own. There's a lot of other things that you could say were Brickle related. The monument inside the park, to the inhabitants of the Hume River, or the Murray River? The Hume Monument. Yeah, that was inside the Brickle store while they were, kind of raising the money and getting it. When it was shipped here, it stood in the store for a while before they put it in the park. So I don't know if Brickle and Kidd had a hand in ordering that monument or what have you, but Joe pointed that out, that it was in the store for a while before they. I suspect there's still going to be things we'll find out. We were on a hunt for the Bulmer family, home sites. We were scouting them out this week. It's never really all ever done. I mean, it's done, but it's just extra curiosity that carries through that you kind of want to know. And I suspect that we may actually maybe find some things through the Bulmer clan about, the Brickles, or maybe another photo through the Kidd, because again, there's only 4 photos of each of them. But I suspect there's more. We were, pretty well off, and I bet you there's some more photos somewhere. I saw another, follow up.
Ask one more question.
Yeah.
Have you ever done genealogy research into the family tree, doing DNA testing?
Not DNA testing, but a great amount of work was done by Denise and by Chris, over the years. There's still a lot to be done on the Bulmer side in England. There's a little interesting little rumor that they could maybe have been of noble background, and that could get really interesting and exciting very quickly if that's the case, from Little Bolton, England. So we'll see. We don't know anything kind of before they get to Sydney, or very little. So that's my next trip in the future would be to England, just to poke around. I don't even know what I'm going to find. And sometimes when you poke around, you find things. In Goulburn, I found the only known document that states that Alice Brickle, born to William and Mary here, was always considered a Brickle, but it was not on the birth certificate. But I did find it on the baptism certificate. So she becomes a very big deal in Miami. So it was nice to kind of put that. There's so many kind of mythological pieces of the Brickles that aren't nailed down, that every time we get one, it's like, yes, we can bank on this. I saw another hand. Yeah.
Look, one thing on that we were wondering about today, Caesar had that map up before that showed that Brickle had that land at the Provider Cafe, and Clancy's is now on, and next to that is the stables as you go down towards the Council Depot. Also had the land opposite, which is a vacant, it's a car park now, that's the land I think that Zornas are going to develop. Their store was lot number 2 of section 6, which is south of the hotel. But they had the land that the Provider Cafe is built on, and we would like to know whether the store that they had south of the Exchange Hotel was said to be of weatherboards. And maybe they built a more substantial store on the other side. But we haven't been able to find who actually built that store originally. I know that was what the store that Elf War had, the butcher, and it was a butcher shop before Elf had it. But whether it was something, certainly Brickle and Kidd owned that block, and whether they built it, that's something we haven't got an answer to yet. So if anybody could help with that, that'd be worthwhile. Have you got more questions? There was one down the back there somewhere with no answer.
That's all right. Well, I'll stick around and chat later, so thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here.
Very interesting talk. Thank you, Caesar. Just back to a couple of Albury connections with those two guys, Brickle and Kidd. William Brickle was 27 when he arrived in Albury, and Adam Kidd was a little older. They obviously realised the capacity for making money, and they became British citizens, which allowed them to buy land because they became British citizens. It also allowed them to stand for the local council, so that when Albury was declared a municipality in 1859, Adam Kidd stood for council and was successful and was one of the original 9 councillors on the Albury City, the municipality of Albury. They were supercharged entrepreneurs, obviously, and the money they made it all within a 10-year period. And one can only imagine that if they'd stayed here instead of taking their money back to Miami, what size would Albury be today? Now, Caesar, thank you for your talk. It's been mentioned about the plaques we've put on certain buildings. We have one of the owners of one of those buildings here tonight who is going to say a formal thank you and present you with something to remember us by. So I'll ask Claire Doolan to come forward and make a presentation to our honoured guest.
Thank you very much, Caesar. That was a very wonderful little talk you gave us tonight, and from another historian, really. I'd like to thank you very much. I'd also like to say thank you to Miami.
Oh.
You have my granddaughter on scholarship
Is that right?
at Miami University.
Oh, there you go. Oh, awesome.
She's freshman captain of the rowing team. But
Another
thank-
Albury connection. This is
That's-
great.
Number
This is our 4 or 5. We lost count. Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm honored. Oh, wow. Oh,
Yes.
Oh, my
So
goodness.
there's
Look
the
at that.
plaque. And we hope Caesar will take that back and proudly display it in his home, show his friends, show his fellow historians.
Right. Beautiful.
One other very interesting little thing that I found in reading Caesar's book is we saw the photo of the Brickell trading post in Miami sitting there in the bushes on the water, and it was found that the scales used in that trading post were the same scales that the Brickells and the kids used in their Townsend Street store. So that was a nice little bit of hardware connecting us as well.
That's true. That's true.
Okay. I had a running, oh, here it is. Thank you. Now to our members segment, and I think Peter Harper has a brief contribution to make to our members segment, renamed from the members 15 minutes because it doesn't matter how long they are. Have you got something, Peter? Yeah. Yep, come forward.
Yeah, that's cool. It's cool.
Okay, I'll have to, I have some nice slides. Six slides in fact.
You'll need to use the mic.
Oh, sorry. All these, can you just scroll down to K there, or go up, please? K. Canelli. Caesar, that's the dentist I was talking
Okay.
about. Okay, I'll try and stand right in front of me. I did have a presentation of 6-7 slides to do with human hobble. I'm going to give a bigger presentation later in the year or the new year, but this is just a connection that I have found in my research, and it involves two items. One, the ship. My mind's gone blank. I'll start off with the second connection, which is
the house that we lived in Corley Street. It's called Rockwood. The Rockwood house was first built in about 1894 by Heath, and then it tracked down over the years with various members and owners through the Harriets, and then down through the Harriets to Saunders, and the Dr. David Nelson, and then to us. So we had the house there for 30 odd years, from 82 through to whatever that comes up to, 2012. Now, the Harriets that owned the house was George Harriet. So if we track, this is a story that I like to connect the 6 degrees of separation from here to Miami, if you can do that. So there's ourselves through to the Harriets, and then that was George Harriet that had it. His father was Frederick George, and then on to Ancram George Harriet. Now, Ancram Harriet married. Have you got it? Oh, there we go. How did you find that? Okay. So we have Hume and Howell. Howell was called the Sterling Man, and Hume the currency lad, the first born Australian in the colony. Next one. So the two connections are the ship and the house. I started off on the house, but we'll start off with the ship. So the convict ship, the Earl Spencer, sailed from London and arrived in Sydney in October 13, and there were 20 free settlers, and one of them was Hume and Howell and his family. There were also 200 convicts. One of those was my great-great-great-grandfather, John Harper. So looking down the very bottom, this is the lineage. There's Peter, there's William Leapart Smith, my father, William John, my grandfather, Alfred Joseph, my great-great-grandfather Joseph, his father, and on to John. So if you count those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you get 6 degrees of separation to William Howell, yes. So I thought that was pretty significant. I'm researching all these things about Hume and Howell to make up a bicycle ride, and I find that connection. Lo and behold, there is a connection through our house to Hamilton Hume. Again, 6 degrees of separation. So could we have the next couple of slides? So this is the house that was painted in 2006 by Margie England. And the address was 684 Corley Street. It's now owned by John and Trish Clifford. It's been substantially modified. But in our time, everybody in Albury knew this was the Harper House, and it was quite significant. Its name was Rockwood. So we, David and Lois left a lovely hand-scrolled copy of the history of the house. I've turned it into this list here, and we can run through, and I mentioned all of those things, stepping back through the Saunders to the Harriets, George Harriet, and putting that together with the house. If you have the next slide, we can see Rockwood on the left. There's Peter and Catherine Harper, George Harriet, his father, Frederick George Harriet, Ancram William Harriet, across to his wife, which was Agnes Mitchell, who was the youngest sister of Emma Mitchell, and they were all daughters of Elizabeth Mitchell, the founders of Albury almost.
That's it. That's all right. That's all right. That's all right. Just mumble.
So, Emma Mitchell married Francis Warden Hume, who was the youngest brother of Hamilton Hume. So there, again, if you count those, there's 6 degrees to separation. So on both sides, I have 6 degrees of separation to Hume and Hoggle. So that's just a little side issue to my research. Thank you. And these are the 2 references, the Hartman family book, which I have here, and Beyond the Borders by Stuart Hamilton Hume, who came here and planted, helped to plant the 5 clone trees. No, they weren't the clone trees at that time. The red gum trees around the hoggle tree down at the park, which I attended today and looked, and it's been well preserved today. It's very good. Thank you.
Before you go, Peter, we want to know what John Harper was sent out for.
Yes.
Ah, he was a horse, an animal. What do you call him well, he finished up as a butcher. He finished up as a butcher in the Rocks. He had a big butcher shop there in the Rocks. And I forgot to mention, though, I'll come back to what he was. His son Joseph moved from Sydney down to Melbourne, and then out to Wood End, where he had a large farm. In particular, he raised a lot of horses. And in 1863, he had 2 runners in the 3rd Melbourne Cup, and one of those won that race. The horse's name was Banker. It was a 3-year-old mare, and they don't normally win, but it did for those who follow the races. Now, John Harper in England, in Bolton, Lancashire, was a horse and cattle and stock agent, and on this particular day when he was doing his trading, business was a bit slow. He was a bit short in honouring his promissory note, and the constable came around the corner, nabbed him, put him in jail. The case came up, and he got a life sentence, which was commuted, and he came out on the ship, the Earl Spencer. His first job was working on Elizabeth Farm under Mrs. MacArthur. Eventually he then went on, after he got his pardon, he became the superintendent of supply, more or less, in the colony, and then he went on to his own to do the butchering. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, we've just had the death of the head of the royal family, but we don't have royalty, but we do have convict royalty, so it's good to see you've got convict royalty, Peter. Just an ad, our publications are on sale at the rear of the room, and Howard Jones' latest book, Lawmen of Albury, hot off the presses. It's available down there for $20, a good read. So just bringing that to your attention, and also a lot of the Historical Society's other publications are down there as well. Just finally, for December, in our guest speaker spot, our guest speaker coordinator, Jenny, has in mind a number of speakers to talk about history of Christmas in Albury, and some reminiscences of what we used to do at Christmas time in Albury. And we're looking for a number of contributors for that. We envisage, 6, 7, even 8 contributors who might be able to come forward to the microphone and say, remember when, or this happened at Christmas. It might have something to do with Christmas during the war, or Christmas in the Depression, or but a Christmas theme. So if you could all give that a bit of thought, that would be good. And come forward to Jenny if you think of something you might like to contribute, either if you think of it tonight or at the next meeting in October, when our guest speaker in October will be a woman called June Factor from Melbourne, speaking about soldiers and aliens. Is that the soldiers and aliens? It's about internment camps for aliens during the war. It'll be very interesting. Now, the other thing, we've been invited again by those who are restoring the Iva to consider having one of our meetings out at the hangar where they're doing the restoration work. It would be an interesting meeting, I'm sure. It'd be a different type of meeting. They'd show us around, and we'd have a lot of things to look at. We could have our meeting as such. So, could I have an indication of a show of hands as to who thinks it might be they might be interested in going out to a meeting at the Iva? Oh, that's great. All right, that's what we wanted to know. Yeah, it'll be a good night. We might be able to have some drinks out there, where, a little bit less formal meeting. So we'll look at that for the new year. And that's about all, I think. So Caesar has offered to stay back for a chat. Have we got our tea and coffee, Helen? Yeah, the tea and coffee's there. We've got Lamingtons. Yeah, you see, we've put oranges at the front to remind Caesar of Florida, but we've got Lamingtons on the table so that he gets introduced to an Australian icon. Now, one thing finally, he loves a chat. He confides in his book that when he was in grade 5, the teacher threatened that he would not be able to go on a field trip because he was talking in class too much. He does love a chat, so stay back and have a chat with him, and thank you all for your attendance.